Hello, Joe. Can you hear me?
I can indeed, Emily, and I just wish I was in Paris. I love Paris, and it's too bad not to be there in presence.
Well, yes, I was going to say welcome to Paris, even if virtually, and you'll get the privilege of being interviewed by the real Emily in Paris. So, on behalf of the president of the French Defense University and the Paris Defense and Strategy Forum team, we wish to warmly thank you for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to share some insights with us today on the current power shifts. So many people here are eager to hear from you today, and I'm quite sure a few of them have read your latest piece, Trump and the Fall of Soft Power, published last Saturday in the Financial Times. So we'll come to that shortly, but let's start with the broader concept with this first question. How do you assess the state of soft power today compared to when you first introduced the concept?
Well, in one sense, soft power is part of the human condition. If power is the ability to get others to do what we want, we can through coercion or payment or attraction. So in that sense, there's always been soft power and always will be. But obviously, under some circumstances, coercion becomes more important and attraction becomes less important. They still remain three crucial dimensions of power. Right now, I think we're going through an era in which there's additional focus on coercion rather than and payment rather than attraction, but they're always present in some degree, all three dimensions. But right now, we're seeing more carrots and sticks rather than honey and sugar.
So you mentioned that in some cases attraction becomes more important. So I think that a lot of non-state actors have understood that. So, for example, corporations, influencers, some NGOs, sometimes dressing up as NGOs. So all these non-state actors are gaining influence. So how do you see soft power evolving beyond traditional state actors?
Well, soft power is an attribute of power, whether it's individuals or non-governmental organizations or governments. That's why corporations are so concerned about their brands and why they spend so much effort to promote their brands. And in that sense, it's not surprising that there are more actors trying to promote their attractiveness. Sometimes, though, they can have a malign effect as well as a benign effect as they try to promote their brands or increase their size. And if you think to an example, when Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center in 2001, Osama bin Laden didn't pay the people who flew into the towers. He didn't coerce them into doing that. He attracted them into doing it through a particularly perverse view of that they shared. So that's an example of how one person's soft power, bin Laden, or one organization, Al-Qaeda, was able to use soft power for a very evil purpose. So we're seeing more transnational actors, technologies making that more feasible, and some of those transnational actors are using their power, hard or soft, for good, and some are using their power hard and soft for bad.
So yes, you mentioned promoting brands and the use of technology to do so, but these non-state actors are also very good at understanding demographic shifts and cultural changes and how to address those different groups. So how do you think demographic shifts and cultural changes will affect the global soft power landscape in coming decades?
Well, we've already seen a quite dramatic shift due to the technology of the internet and social media. It's interesting, at the beginning of this century, the proportion of the world that was actually attached to each other through the internet was very small, just a few percent. The internet goes all the way back to the 1970s, but the World Wide Web and the instantaneous communication, which now touches the large majority of the people in the world, this really burgeons in at the beginning of this century, after about 2000. And along with that, you have the growth of social media, which allow everyone to be their own newspaper publisher or their own broadcaster. And some of those actors who get involved are good, some of them are very bad. In the world of traditional broadcast media, there were intermediaries, interlocutors or editors who kept out some of the most terrible expressions. On the internet, there isn't. You have all sorts of manipulative messages as well as truthful ones, and it makes it much more difficult to discern what's true and what's not true. And that makes it quite possible for governments with malign intents to interfere in this social media and to manipulate it. So I think what we've seen is some people would call that a democratization of communications with a small d. One can argue that there are good effects of this and there are bad effects of this. Somebody once said before the internet, every village had its own village idiot. And what's happened with the internet is all these village idiots are now connected to each other. That makes a more difficult communications environment.
So you mentioned there the democratization of communication and how those non-state actors can now connect to each other. If we move away from non-state actors, I'd like to talk about authoritarian regimes. So do you think that authoritarian regimes can genuinely build sustainable soft power, or is soft power inherently tied to democratic values?
Well, the authoritarian regimes can build soft power. Remember, soft power always depends on the eye of the beholder. So a message which is designed to attract for one audience may repel or not attract for another. For example, if you have a video of women wearing bikinis and divorcing their husbands, that may be very attractive in the United States and Europe, but very unattractive in Iran or in Saudi Arabia. And similarly, if you ask, does Russia have any soft power left after its invasion of Ukraine? Well, it does in terms of what they call the near abroad, the areas that are still influenced by Russia. China, as an authoritarian country, has been trying to increase its soft power. Indeed, in 2007, the Chinese president, Hu Jintao, said that China had to invest more in soft power. And it's made progress, but it hasn't gotten a very good return on its investment for two reasons. One is it has conflicts with its neighbors. So it's very hard to increase your attractiveness in New Delhi if Chinese soldiers are killing Indian soldiers on the border in the Himalayas. And in addition to that, China insists on tight party control of its civil society, which means when you get a true creative artist like Ai Weiwei, he winds up in jail or in exile. And that sets limits to Chinese soft power. And you can see these limits when you look at things like the Pew polls, which show people are asked in 23 countries, are you more attracted to the US or China? This was a 1923 poll, and they came out much in favor of the US in all continents except Africa, where it was close to being tied. So, yes, authoritarians can have soft power, but it tends to be limited, and the extent to which a country's policies are related to more universal values and democratic principles, I think that gives it a wider audience. So I still think there's a benefit from having democratic origins of a country's message, but soft power depends on whether it attracts, and different peoples are attracted by different things.
Thank you. So you just mentioned there a comparison between the US and China. So that competition also happens, happens in many fields. So if we look at emerging global challenges such as AI governance, for example, or climate change, what role do you think soft and smart power should have, especially in the US approach to these emerging challenges?
Well, these problems of how to deal with climate change or how to govern AI are dependent on collective action. And for collective action requires an ability to attract others to an agenda. And that's why I think the recent actions of the United States have been, under the Trump administration, have been so unfortunate. Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord in his first term, and he did it again at the beginning of his second term. That makes the U.S. approach less attractive to the thousands of people who believe that climate change is real and that collective action is necessary. So that's an example of where you have a loss for the world, for the common interest, but also a loss for the United States in terms of its leadership position on one of the major global issues. I think the same will become increasingly true of artificial intelligence, even though the U.S. has a lead in the technology of artificial intelligence. It's not a monopoly. China is also working on it, as is Europe and others. And in that sense, the ability to attract others rather than just coerce them or pay them in terms of developing common policies remains extremely important. And unfortunately, we're not seeing this now with the new American administration.
So about that, so you do extend quite a bit on that in your latest article, so I highly recommend everyone in the room to read it. So published last weekend in the Financial Times. So in that article, you mention that, I quote, the American attractiveness diminished during Trump's first term. So would this decline of soft power serve the rise of the rest during Trump's second term? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's important to take a historical perspective and to realize that soft power goes up and down. It's cyclical in a sense. If you look at American soft power in the period of the Vietnam War, the government policies were leading people to march in the streets opposing the United States war in Vietnam. And similarly, during the American war in Iraq, you had widespread opposition. So it's interesting that after both of these low points of American soft power, it was able to recover. The policies of Carter on human rights and of Reagan on a generally more optimistic attitude helped to restore American soft power by the late 70s or early 80s. And one of the things that's always intrigued me is what a British official once said to me in 2008, which is the Americans were extremely unpopular at the beginning of 2008 because of Iraq, but then they went and elected their first African-American president, Obama, and all of a sudden they were popular again and attractive again. And you can see this in the public opinion polls. I mean, this isn't just impressionistic, it's measurable. So when you get, you have an uptick in American soft power under Obama, then when Trump comes in, the polls show his policy of America first, which sort of implies everybody else second, or that it's all me, not we, that alienates people, and it goes down. The attractiveness has an uptick again under Biden, but and it's too soon to see any meaningful polls internationally for the 8 weeks or so we've had of Trump. But I would expect that we're going to see a decline in American soft power as he returns to this America first zero-sum attitude of how we define our national interest. It's quite plausible to define the national interest in ways which is consistent with and reinforces the national interests of others. That's not how Trump approaches these issues. He's more like the New York real estate dealer who feels that every transaction has a winner and a loser. And I think that's going to hurt our soft power over the next 4 years.
So in that case, I guess my follow-up question is, could the decline of American soft power lead to a less stable international order?
Yes, I think so. It's not that the Americans have been perfect. They certainly haven't been. And they've done some bad things and some dumb things in the past. On the other hand, the fact that the United States has generally been supportive of democracy and human rights and has tried to support certain international institutions like the UN or the Bretton Woods institutions, this has created a degree of stability. Again, not perfect. The Americans themselves have not been perfect in their adherence to these principles, but it's a lot better than a chaotic world in which everyone is dog eat dog. Contrast the period after World War II with the period before World War II, and you can see why it makes a difference to have leadership in terms of being attractive in relation to certain crucial values, universal values. And in that sense, I think we're facing a difficult period where the loss of American soft power will weaken American alliances. People will trust the United States less. It will weaken international institutions, such as the climate accords or such as the UN. And I think that leads to a more unstable world.
So on that depressing note, I'll move on to my next questions. Another point that you raised in your article. So you raised the point of the, information space. So in a world that's increasingly digitalized, that offers the possibility for fast traveling information, but that also means fast traveling disinformation, propaganda, and misinformation. How in that space is the effectiveness of soft power affected?
Well, the changes in the technology make it mean that more people can promote ideas, and they can do it at much lower price, and they can do it instantaneously. So it's everything everywhere all at once. And that leads to a devaluation, if you want, of truth, that people say, well, I'm so swamped by all this information that I don't know what's true or not. Russia was found to have interfered in the American elections in 2016. And part of what the Russians were doing was just simply try to create distrust and make people not believe in anything. So, for example, there was evidence that there was announcement of a protest in a city in Texas in which people were going to demonstrate for the Quran or demonstrate against the Quran. And this led to groups meeting at this crossroads in Texas and shouting at each other. And it was totally phony. Neither of the groups really existed. There was no planned demonstration for or against the Quran, but it had been part of the Russian disinformation campaign. That's an example of how manipulative governments can, in fact, disrupt the sense of trust that's essential for the effective functioning of democracies. And I'm afraid, I'd like to tell you all this is going to get better, but I'm afraid that with artificial intelligence and bots, you can now swamp the internet and social media even more. You just turn on a machine and it promotes these nonsensical ideas, but swamps the communications mechanisms. And that means many people say, well, I don't know what's true anymore. That's not healthy for democracy.
So I'd like to move out of the specific information space and go back to the broader concept. So if you were to redefine or extend upon the concept of power for the 21st century and what lies ahead of us, what key points would you emphasize for us, and what key points would you tell us to be on the lookout for?
Well, I think it's important to realize that power is the ability together to do what you want, and it has three dimensions. One is coercion, second is payment, and the third is attraction. And when you can combine all three of those so that they reinforce each other rather than cancel each other out, you're going to be more effective in power. That's true before or after the 21st century, but it's become more complicated now given the information technology changes that we've been discussing. And I think it's going to be important then for governments and other actors to ask, how do I make my message credible, and how do I reach others with that message? And so as one thinks about using power in international relations, one has to think, for example, what's the role of my military? What's the role of my large economy? But also, what's the role of my culture? A lot of soft power is generated not by the government's policies, but by the civil society. For example, a lot of American soft power is generated by the universities or the foundations or Hollywood. People still are attracted even though the government may be doing things they disagree with. Or if you look at French soft power, I mean, French culture, French cuisine, French literature, I mean, a lot of people are going to want to experience France and Paris, even if they are not happy with a particular policy of the French government. So I think it's important then to realize that as governments approach power in this century, in the age of the internet and social media, that they have to think of all three dimensions simultaneously.
Thank you very much. So with that, I would say that this concludes this session, as we are very close to the end of the time that we've been allocated. So thank you very much for concluding the second day of the Paris Defense and Strategy Forum in its second edition. So on a personal note, Joe, I would also like to add that I am forever grateful for the way that you have expressed support for my work over the past decade and for being a very strong shield against self-doubt. So ceaseless thanks for that. And once again, on behalf of the President of the Paris Defense and Strategy Forum and all the participants in this event, many, many thanks for your time and for your very valuable insights today. We definitely need wise men like you to help us face the challenges that we have now and that we will have tomorrow. So please join me in thoroughly thanking Joseph Nye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Voilà, merci à tous, merci pour votre participation, merci pour votre attention. Et c'est sur la vision inspirante de Joseph Nye qu'on ferme cette deuxième journée. Rendez-vous demain à 9h dans tous les espaces évidemment de programmation, mais notamment ici dans l'Amphifoche. 9h pour 4 différentes tables rondes passionnantes, mais aussi, vous le savez, à 17h, ne loupez pas l'intervention du général Thierry Bucard, qui est donc le chef d'état-major des armées. Je vous souhaite une très belle soirée, je vous dis à demain.